I never imagined my life would come to that moment. Standing on the side of a dusty country road with my clothes still smelling like smoke, my hair matted with soot, and my hands trembling so badly I had to hold them against my skirt just to make them stop. The wind picked up around me, sharp and violent, and for a second I thought it was another fire starting somewhere nearby. But then I heard it, the deep chopping roar of helicopter blades cutting through the air. I looked up, squinting against the sun. A sleek black helicopter circled lower and lower until the gusts it created nearly knocked me off my feet. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I remember thinking, this can't be for me. This kind of thing doesn't happen to people like me. But it kept descending, sending loose gravel skittering across the road. When it finally landed, the door swung open, and out stepped a man I barely recognized. Tall, confident, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my old truck. And yet, the second he saw me, his face softened with something I hadn't seen from my own family in years. "Margaret? My God, what happened to you?" he shouted over the noise. Hearing my name in his voice, older now, deeper, felt like someone had cracked open a part of my chest I didn't even know was still alive. Ethan Brooks. The boy I once fed at my kitchen table. The boy I drove to school when no one else bothered. The boy who told me at 16 years old, "Someday I'm gonna pay you back, Maggie. I promise." I never believed he meant it. I never expected anything from him. But there he was, rushing toward me with his arms open while my own son wouldn't even let me cross his doorstep. As he reached me, I felt my knees weaken. I tried to steady myself, but the exhaustion hit me all at once. Ethan caught my arm gently. "You're shaking," he said, his voice breaking. "Tell me who did this. Tell me who left you like this." I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. All I could see was Carol's face twisted in disgust, the way she slammed the door in mine, and Jake's silhouette behind her, my son, who never even stepped forward to see if I was all right. Ethan pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around my shoulders without hesitation. It smelled faintly of cedar and something expensive I couldn't name. "You're safe now," he told me. "Just tell me where you want to go. Wherever it is, I'll take you." For a moment I just stared at him. The road stretched out empty in both directions, nothing but fields, smoke, and sky. My house was gone. My family had turned their backs on me. I had nowhere to go. And yet this man, this child I once comforted, looked at me like I still mattered. I let out a shaky breath. "Ethan," I said, I didn't know who else to call." He shook his head. "You think I'd ever let you stand here alone? After everything you did for me?" His voice softened even more. "Come on. You're coming with me." The blades roared louder as he helped me toward the helicopter. The wind whipped around my face, stinging my eyes with dust and tears. I wasn't sure which was which anymore. Before climbing inside, I turned back for one last look at the road. The same road I had walked down just hours earlier, still believing my family would be there for me. Maybe you felt that kind of betrayal before. The kind that hits you so hard it takes the air right out of your lungs. If you have, then you understand why my legs felt so heavy, why my heart felt like something fragile I was suddenly afraid to touch. And if you haven't, well, I hope you never do. Ethan squeezed my hand. "We'll figure everything out," he said. "Start from the beginning. Tell me what happened." I swallowed hard, feeling the truth rising like smoke in my chest. Let me back up," I whispered. "Let me tell you how all of this started. I suppose the best place to begin is with who I used to be. Before the smoke, before the ashes, before the day my own family looked at me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience standing on their porch. My name is Margaret Ellison, and at 72 years old I still considered myself a strong woman. Maybe a little slower on the stairs, maybe a little forgetful when it came to where I left my glasses, but strong. I had built an entire life on resilience. I'd buried a husband, survived breast cancer, worked double shifts as a nurse, and raised a son who for most of his life made me believe I'd done something right. My home, even if it wasn't much compared to others, was my sanctuary. It was a small wooden house sitting on 2 acres of land that my husband and I bought almost 50 years ago. We imagined we'd grow old together in that place. We didn't get the chance, but I kept the house exactly as he loved it. The creaking floors, the old photos he insisted on keeping on every wall, the chipped blue cabinets he refused to replace because he said, "They've got character, Maggie." It was a peaceful life. Quiet, predictable, and mine. Jake, my only son, moved out when he was 22. At first he visited every Sunday, bringing laundry or a bag of groceries he claimed he got on sale. I saw right through him. He always was proud and never wanted me to think he was struggling. When he married Carol 12 years ago, the visits became a little less frequent but still warm. Carol and I weren't close, but she was polite enough. A little too polished, maybe. The kind of woman who always seemed to be posing for a photograph that wasn't being taken. But I tried. I really did. None of the problems started all at once. They crept in quietly, little drafts of cold air through the cracks of what I thought was a stable family. I remember the first time something felt off. It was about a year ago. I had invited Jake and Carol for Sunday dinner. I made pot roast, his favorite, and set the table with the good china. When they arrived, they stood at the doorway longer than usual. Carol didn't step inside right away. She looked down at the floor like she was inspecting it. "Is there dust?" she asked, wrinkling her nose. "It's a house, Carol," I replied gently. "It has surfaces." Jake laughed, but it wasn't a warm laugh. More like he didn't want to make her upset. And while we ate, he kept glancing at her, waiting for cues, when to speak, when to smile, when to agree. I didn't think much of it then. People change in marriage. I knew that better than anyone. Another incident came a few months later. I had gone to their house to drop off some quilts I'd made for the winter. I rang the bell and waited. And waited. Through the window I saw shadows moving. I heard Carol whisper, "Don't answer yet. Let me finish this." When she finally opened the door, she gave me a forced smile and said, "Sorry, we were cleaning." But the house behind her was spotless. The smell of lemon polish nearly knocked me over. I tried not to overthink things. You'd be surprised how easy it is to talk yourself out of your own instincts, especially when they involve the people you love most. But there was one moment that I couldn't shake off, no matter how hard I tried. It happened on a Thursday morning. Jake had stopped by just to check on me, he said. First it felt sweet, rare but sweet. We sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee. Then he lifted his mug and said, "Mom, have you ever thought about selling this place?" I froze. Why would I sell my home? He shrugged too casually. "It's old, and a lot to handle alone." Carol and I were thinking, maybe you'd be more comfortable somewhere smaller. Somewhere smaller? I repeated. "This is my home, Jake." He smiled in a way I didn't recognize. "Just think about it, okay?" But the thing that stuck with me wasn't what he said. It was the way his eyes wandered around the house, as if calculating something, assessing, measuring. It wasn't the look of a son admiring his childhood home. It was the look of a man studying a property. I told myself I was being dramatic. That aging makes you more sensitive. That grief, even years later, clouds judgment. But deep down, something cold began to settle inside me, something I hadn't felt since the weeks after my husband died. The sensation that I was alone, and that I needed to be careful. The weeks that followed were filled with more small moments. Things that didn't make sense but didn't feel big enough to confront. Once, I came home from the grocery store and found my back gate open. Another time, I found a stack of my mail placed neatly on the kitchen counter, even though I knew I left it by the front door. And when I asked Jake if he'd stopped by, he hesitated for just a second too long before saying he hadn't. Still, I tried to believe in them, because believing otherwise meant accepting a truth too painful to face. But everything changed the day Ethan called. It had been years since I heard from him. He'd moved away, built a tech company, and, according to a magazine article I once found online, became something of a prodigy. I always smiled when I saw his name. He'd been a lost soul when he lived down the road as a teenager. His parents were never around. He used to sit on my porch after school, eating the sandwiches I made and telling me he'd make something of himself someday. I loved that boy like he was my own. So when my phone rang and I heard, "Maggie? It's Ethan," I nearly dropped the receiver. We caught up for a while, small talk, laughter, the kind of warmth I hadn't felt from anyone in my family in months. Then he asked, "Can I visit? I'll be in town next week." I agreed without hesitation. I told Jake, expecting him to smile or at least pretend to be happy for me. Instead, his expression darkened. "Why's he coming back?" he asked. "He wants to visit," I replied, confused. Jake shook his head slowly. "People like that don't visit, Mom. They want something. I stared at him, stunned. Ethan is like family. He's not, Jake snapped. I am. Carol, who had been pretending not to listen, finally chimed in. Just be careful what you say to him. I didn't understand then, but I would soon. The fire hadn't happened yet. The worst was still coming. But that afternoon, watching the two of them exchange a look I couldn't quite read, was the first time I felt truly unsettled. Have you ever sensed a storm coming before the sky even darkens? That's what it felt like. A pressure in the air. A warning in my bones. I wish I could say I listened to it. But when you're a mother, your heart always tries, sometimes desperately, to believe the best. And that's exactly how I missed the signs that everything was about to fall apart. I wish I could tell you that the uneasy feeling I've been carrying finally pushed me to trust my instincts. But the truth is, I kept brushing it aside, the way mothers do when the truth would hurt too much to hold. I kept telling myself Jake was just stressed, that Carol was just particular, that the strange little incidents around my home were coincidences. But deep down, something inside me had already begun watching, quietly, carefully, the way you watch a wild animal moving just out of sight in the woods. The turning point came one Friday afternoon in early spring. I had gone into town to pick up some fertilizer for my garden. When I got home, I found my front door unlocked. I always locked it, always. The habit had been drilled into me after my husband died. Not out of fear but out of practicality. So when the handle turned easily beneath my hand, a chill went through me. I pushed the door open slowly. Everything looked normal, too normal. The living room was neat, the curtains drawn exactly the way I had left them. But something felt wrong. The air had that strange stillness a room gets when someone has just slipped out of its seconds before you entered. My eyes scanned every corner, every shadow. On the coffee table, my photo albums were slightly shifted. A drawer in my hutch sat open by half an inch. And the faint smell of Carol's perfume, something sharp and floral, seemed to linger in the hallway. My pulse sped up. Hello. I called out, my voice shaking. Silence. I walked through the house slowly, my feet barely touching the floor, listening for anything, a breath, a whisper, the creak of a floorboard. But there was nothing. Whoever had been there was long gone. When I reached my bedroom, my heart dropped. My jewelry box, one I'd kept locked since my wedding day, was sitting open on the bed. Everything was inside but moved around, disturbed, touched. I stood there staring at it, my breath caught in my chest. Jake had a spare key. Carol did too. And suddenly I knew. But knowing something in your bones isn't the same as being ready to accept it. I closed the jewelry box, locked it, and placed it back where it belonged. I told myself maybe they had stopped by. Maybe they were checking on me. Maybe they hadn't wanted to bother me while I was out. I kept repeating that lie to myself, even though it tasted like ashes in my mouth. 2 days later, Jake called. Hey Mom. Thinking of stopping by. You home? I froze. His tone was too light, too casual, the way people sound when they are testing something. Yes, I replied. Come over. When he arrived, I watched him closely, paying attention to things I had never noticed before. How he looked around as he stepped inside. How his eyes scanned the living room as though taking mental pictures. How he touched the sides of furniture with the tips of his fingers like he was confirming placement. He didn't even notice me watching. Everything okay? I asked. Oh sure, he said, forcing a smile. Just wanted to see you. But as he walked into the kitchen, I saw something in his pocket. An envelope with my name written on it. He didn't take it out. He didn't mention it. And when he left an hour later, the envelope was gone. That night, I decided I needed to stop pretending. Something was happening. Something they weren't telling me. That was when I started paying attention. I began leaving objects in specific positions. Little things like a teacup slightly turned or a book resting on the arm of the sofa. When I returned from errands, they were moved. Not a lot. Not enough for anyone who didn't set them deliberately to notice. But enough for me to know someone had been inside. I also started watching the driveway from my bedroom window. Twice, I saw Carol's car turning around near the end of my street. Once she slowed down in front of my house, looked straight toward the porch and then drove off. She didn't wave. She didn't come in. She didn't call. One afternoon, I walked into the backyard and found muddy footprints leading from the fence to my back steps. A cigarette butt lay near my rose bushes. No one in my family smoked. I didn't know if the tracks were related to Jake and Carol or something else entirely, but every little thing added weight to the dread building inside me. The moment everything sharpened came a week later. I had gone to the pharmacy to pick up my prescriptions. When I got home, there was a car parked across the road, Carol's car. I recognized the shiny silver hood and the pink air freshener hanging from the mirror. My stomach twisted into knots. I stepped out of my truck quietly and stayed in the shadow of the open door. The passenger window of Carol's car was cracked open just enough for me to hear voices. "I'm telling you she'll agree soon," Jake said. "She's getting tired. You saw her coughing yesterday." Carol's voice, smooth and cold, followed. "She'll hold on as long as she can. Old people get stubborn when they know they're losing control." My hand tightened around the truck door. "She's not losing control," Jake whispered. "We're just trying to help her." "That land is worth 7 figures, Jake," Carol snapped. "Stop pretending this is about helping her. This is about securing our future. If she won't make the decision willingly, then we have to encourage her." I felt the blood leave my face. My legs went weak. Encourage her. It wasn't the word itself, it was the tone. Calculated. Matter of fact. Like my life and home were business decisions to be made over a cup of coffee. My breath hitched too loud. The sound must have carried, because the conversation stopped abruptly. Jake's head turned toward the window. His eyes met mine from across the road. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he forced a smile, stiff, unnatural. He nudged Carol, who quickly lifted her phone and pretended to be checking something. The car pulled away seconds later, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the air. That night, I sat at the kitchen table for hours, staring at the wood grain, tracing the grooves my husband had carved when he rested his elbows there every morning. I felt like the ground beneath my life had shifted in ways I couldn't yet understand. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being paranoid. They were plotting something and I was standing in their way. The next morning, I found evidence that removed all doubt. I had dropped my truck off at the local auto shop for a tune-up. The mechanic, a kind man named Harold, called me while I was still walking home. "Margaret? Did you know someone's been messing with your brake lines?" My heart stopped. "My brake lines?" I repeated, struggling to breathe. "Yeah, they're loose. Not how they should be. I don't know who's been working on your car, but it's not safe to drive." I sat down on a low stone wall near the road, my hands shaking uncontrollably. "Harold, are you sure?" "I wouldn't say it lightly," he replied. "You got someone looking out for you? Someone who might be trying to, well, help." The word hit me like a punch. Help. The same word Jake used. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. I hung up the phone and covered my mouth with both hands. I didn't want to believe Jake could do something so reckless, so dangerous. But the whispers, the unlocked door, the rearranged belongings, the envelope, the conversations, all of it suddenly formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. My family wasn't worried about me. They were circling me, waiting, planning. And I realized that if I didn't start protecting myself, no one else would. But what I discovered next made the brake lines feel like nothing in comparison. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind against the siding, every distant dog bark. My mind kept repeating Harold's words like a broken record. "Your brake lines aren't safe." I knew what that meant. What it could have meant if I had taken one wrong turn. If a deer had jumped out in front of me. If the road had been just a little wet. The thought made my chest tighten. By sunrise, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Jake or Carol. Not yet. I needed to know exactly what they were planning before I made any move. And if they were bold enough to enter my home, I needed to be bolder. So I began paying attention to everything, every sound, every object, every small change. That same morning, I went to the town library. I sat at a computer in the back corner and looked up something I had never imagined I'd need to search. Elder financial exploitation signs. Reading through the list felt like someone had taken my last few months and written them down point by point. Unexplained entries into the home. Pressure to sell property. Sudden conversations about incapacity. Attempts to isolate. It was all there. But the line that made my stomach drop was this. Manipulation disguised as concern. I clicked out of the page, my hands trembling on the mouse. I wasn't ready to face the truth in plain text. As I was leaving the library, I heard someone call my name. Margaret. It was Mrs. Alvarez, my neighbor from 2 streets over. A sweet woman with a strong personality and sharper intuition. She hurried over, slightly out of breath. "I saw Carol's car near your house again yesterday," she said, lowering her voice. "Is everything all right?" Something in the way she asked, concern mixed with suspicion, made me pause. And before I could stop myself, I asked, "Have you seen them here often?" Her eyebrows drew together. "More than usual. And sometimes when you're not home." The world felt like it tilted beneath my feet. "When I'm not home?" She nodded. I didn't want to pry, but, well, I know what it looks like when someone is circling a house that isn't theirs. I swallowed hard. "Thank you. Truly." She gave me a long look, the kind of look women our age give each other when we understand more than we say. "If you need anything," she whispered, "you come to me." I walked home slowly, my mind racing. If Mrs. Alvarez had seen them around my property, then it wasn't paranoia. Something was happening behind my back, and they weren't even trying very hard to hide it anymore. When I reached my house, a white envelope was tucked under my doormat. My heart jumped into my throat. It had no name on it, no address. I lifted it with 2 fingers, almost afraid it might burn me. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "We need to talk about the future of the property. It's important." No signature, no explanation. Just that. I stood there in the doorway, gripping the note as the morning breeze tugged at the edges. I could practically hear Carol's voice behind the words. Crisp, insistent, rehearsed. And Jake's silence woven through it. Something snapped inside me then. Not anger, not fear, but clarity. They weren't waiting for me to volunteer my home. They were preparing to take it. That afternoon I tested a small theory. I announced loudly on the phone, while no one was actually on the line, that I'd be gone all day visiting a friend in the next town. I even rattled keys, jiggled the lock, and closed the door loudly as if leaving. But I stayed. I sat in my bedroom with the lights off, the curtains drawn just enough for me to see the front yard without being seen. I waited. Every sound made my heart jump. My hands were cold despite the warm air. 2 hours passed. Then 3. Just when I thought I had been foolish to expect anything, a car slowed near my house. I leaned forward, barely breathing. It was Carol's car. It didn't park directly in front. Instead, it pulled over near the end of the driveway, as if trying not to draw attention. The engine stayed on for a minute before she finally stepped out. My palms broke into a sweat. She looked around, first up the road, then down it. Then at my house. She moved quickly, almost confidently, toward my front porch, glancing back only once. A key glinted in her hand. My key. My entire body went rigid as stone. She unlocked my door and slipped inside without hesitation. Without knocking. Without calling out. Without permission. I felt the world shrink to the size of a pinhole. I rose from my spot at the window and moved silently to the hallway, heart hammering so loudly I worried she might hear it through the walls. I peeked toward the living room and saw her shadow move across the floor. She was rifling through papers on my desk. I could hear the soft rustle, the gentle clink of drawers being opened. At one point she muttered something under her breath, something like, "Finally." I wanted to storm out and confront her, demand to know what she thought she was doing, scream at her to get out of my house, but instinct told me to stay hidden. I needed evidence. I needed understanding. I needed to know exactly what I was up against. After several minutes she walked out with a folder, one of mine. One that contained documents about the property line and tax value. She tucked it under her arm and left the house as casually as if she had borrowed a cup of sugar. She didn't even lock the door behind her. I stood frozen until the sound of her car faded completely. Then I sank onto the floor, my legs too weak to hold me. She had been inside my home. She had taken things. She had used my key. And she clearly believed she had the right to do it. That was when I realized Carol wasn't acting alone. Jake had to be part of it. He was the one who kept pushing the idea of selling the house. He was the one who had access to my keys. He was the one who kept watching my belongings as if calculating what they were worth. But I still didn't know the full scope. Not yet. The final confirmation of their intentions came 3 days later. An accident, really. Or maybe fate. I was returning from the market, bags in hand, when I passed Carol's car parked beside the grocery store. The windows were half down, and lying on the passenger seat, partially covered by a scarf, was a thick folder. I don't know what urged me, but I paused, pretending to rearrange the bags in my hands while I glanced inside. My heart stuttered. I recognized the folder. It was mine, the same one she took from my house. The edge of a paper stuck out, and on it, in bold letters at the top, I saw, "Projected sale value Ellison property." My stomach twisted. I stepped closer, pulse racing. Another page showed estimated demolition costs. Another listed potential buyers. At the bottom of one page was a handwritten note in Jake's handwriting. "Once settled, force POA paperwork." Oh, power of attorney. The world spun. I grabbed the side of the car to steady myself. They weren't just planning to take my property. They were planning to take control of my life. I backed away slowly, my breath shallow. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. People walked past me, unaware that my entire world had just cracked open right there in the parking lot. That was the moment I understood they didn't see me as a mother anymore. They saw me as an obstacle, a barrier, a signature they needed. And from that moment on, every part of me hardened. Every fear turned into determination. Every doubt turned into resolve. I wasn't going to let them take what I had built my entire life. But I also knew something else, something far more terrifying. If they had gone this far already, what would they do next? And that's when I decided to gather real evidence. Because if I confronted them without proof, I'd be walking straight into their trap. I didn't recognize myself anymore. I'd always been the kind of woman who trusted the people she loved, sometimes to a fault. But after finding my documents in Carol's car and seeing Jake's handwriting on those pages, those awful, cold, calculated lines, the part of me that once believed in them went quiet. Something else took its place. Something sharper. Something that had been dormant for a long time. Survival. Every morning after that revelation, I woke up with a clear mission. Gather proof. Not speculation, not intuition, proof. Something undeniable. Something that would make even the most sympathetic listener understand exactly what was being done to me. First, I didn't know where to start. Technology had never been my strong suit. My phone was old and slow, and half the time I couldn't tell if it was ringing or just vibrating against the table. But the anger, quiet, focused anger, pushed me forward. I began small. I took pictures of everything that looked out of place in my house. The drawers left open. The footprints in my garden. The envelope they'd left on my porch. I even photographed the break line report Harold had written for me when I asked him for documentation. He looked worried when I explained why. "Margaret," he said gently, "if someone's doing this to you, you need to talk to the police." I shook my head. "Not yet. I need more." "More," he repeated. "How much more before something happens?" I told him I understood the risk. But I also knew that if I went to the police now, Jake could spin the story with ease. He'd say I was confused, forgetful, paranoid. Carol would bat her eyelashes and talk about stress, about how they were simply trying to help an aging mother who was becoming difficult. And the police, most of them young enough to be my grandchildren, would look at me with that soft, patronizing pity that always came with the word elderly. I wasn't going to give them the chance to paint me as fragile. I needed to be undeniable. So I set traps. Subtle things. I placed a thin layer of flour behind the back door, barely visible unless you knew to look. I balanced a tiny bell on the inside of the laundry room door. I left a small strip of tape, clear and nearly invisible, across the opening of my bureau drawer. For 3 days nothing happened. I allowed myself to feel relieved, believing for a moment that maybe I was wrong, that maybe the danger had passed. But on the 4th day, I woke to find the flour scattered and smeared, the bell lying on the floor, and the tape broken clean through. Someone had been inside my home again. And this time they hadn't bothered hiding it. My hand shook as I photographed everything, the timestamp glowing on the screen. I felt my throat tighten. The air in the house felt wrong, as if someone had just stepped out moments before I woke. I checked every room, every closet, every shadow. All empty, but the sensation of being watched lingered. That afternoon I drove to the hardware store, carefully with new brake lines installed, and bought a cheap motion-activated camera. It wasn't fancy, but it didn't need to be. It just needed to capture a face. I spent the evening hiding it behind a vase in the hallway, angling it toward my front door. I checked the recording light 3 times before I finally went to bed, exhausted. The camera recorded nothing the first night. Nothing the second. But on the third night, just past midnight, the motion alert chimed softly. I sat up in my bed, adrenaline flooding through me. My finger trembled as I opened the footage. There, standing in my hallway, illuminated by the camera's faint infrared glow, was Jake. My son. He wasn't calling out for me. He wasn't checking if I was home. He wasn't concerned. He was looking through my files. He opened my desk drawer, flipped through my mail, and then searched my kitchen cabinet as if expecting to find something hidden inside. And worst of all, he moved with familiarity, casual, practiced, confident, like someone who had done this before. I watched frozen as he walked down the hall toward my bedroom. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. The recording cut off just before he reached the door, probably because the camera's angle didn't capture that hallway fully. But the implication was clear. He had stood outside my bedroom in the middle of the night. Watching the footage felt like ice water being poured over my spine. I replayed it again and again, hoping to find some explanation, something that could make it less sinister. But the more I watched, the more obvious it became. He wasn't checking on me. He was searching for something. Or deciding something. The next morning I saved the footage to a USB drive and hid it under a loose floorboard beneath my bed. If Jake or Carol ever found that, I knew I'd be in real danger. Still, I couldn't bring myself to confront him. Not yet. Instead, I decided to gather more. Over the next several days, I observed everything. Jake called me more often, his voice too cheerful, too curious about my routines. Carol stopped by unexpectedly, offering to help clean. She glanced at my desk more than she glanced at me. Each time she left, I checked the traps again. Each time something else had been disturbed. They were getting bolder. And desperate people make dangerous choices. 3 weeks after the folder incident, Jake invited me to dinner at their house. His tone on the phone was careful. Too careful. "We just want to talk, Mom," he said. "About, well, everything." I hesitated. "Is Carol going to be there?" "Of course," he said quickly. My stomach tightened. "I'm busy tonight." "Busy?" he repeated, sounding surprised. "Doing what?" The question struck me like a slap. When did my adult son begin asking me to explain my schedule? Why did he expect me to answer? "I'm busy," I repeated firmly. "That's all." The silence on the line lingered a moment too long. "All right," he finally said. "Maybe another time." But his tone wasn't disappointment, it was calculation. When I hung up, I felt sick. That night I couldn't sit still. I walked from room to room, checking locks, checking windows, checking that the camera was still recording. I felt like prey, aware of predators circling just beyond the tree line. At around 10 o'clock, someone knocked. I froze. The sound echoed through the quiet house, 3 firm knocks. Not the friendly kind. Not hesitant. Demanding. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. After a long moment, Jake's voice came through the door. "Mom? You awake? We need to talk." My pulse raced. I stayed silent. He knocked again, louder. "Mom, open the door. I know you're awake." Something in his tone, urgent, irritated, impatient, made every hair on my arm stand up. I stepped quietly down the hall and backed into my bedroom, careful not to let the floorboards creak. Jake knocked 3 more times before finally giving up. But I didn't relax until I heard his car pull away. I barely slept that night. And the next morning my decision was made. I wasn't gathering evidence anymore. I was preparing to survive. The first thing I did was call Ethan. I told myself I was only updating an old friend, only checking in, but as soon as his voice came through the line, something inside me cracked. "Maggie? You okay? You sound strange." My throat tightened. "I'm fine," I lied. I need a favor." "What kind?" he asked gently. "A big one." He didn't hesitate. "Anything." And for the first time in months, I felt the faintest flicker of safety. But before Ethan could help, I needed one more thing. Undeniable proof that Jake and Carol were conspiring to take everything from me. And as it turned out, they were about to hand me that proof themselves. I didn't have to wait long for the final piece of proof. It came sooner than I expected, sooner than I was ready for, but exactly when they thought I was weakest. 2 days after the late-night knocking, Jake called again. This time he didn't bother with the friendly tone. "Mom," he said sharply, "we need to meet. Today. It's important." Everything inside me froze. "Why?" "Just come over. Carol made dinner." That alone told me something was wrong. Carol didn't cook. Ever. "I'm not feeling well," I said. A beat of silence. Then, "Mom, stop. This isn't a request." Something about the way he said that, cold, commanding, made the air around me thicken. "I will not be coming," I replied, steadying my voice. He exhaled into the phone, frustrated. "Fine. Then I'm coming to you." My heart pounded. "No. I'm resting." "Mom." I said no. For a moment he said nothing. Then he lowered his voice. "If you make this difficult, it's going to get worse for you." The bottom dropped out of my stomach. He hung up. I stood there in my kitchen, the humming of the refrigerator suddenly too loud, the ticking of the clock sharp enough to pierce the quiet. The man I raised, the boy who once covered me with a blanket when I fell asleep on the couch, had just threatened me. Not hinted. Not implied. Threatened. My hands shook so violently, I had to hold them against the counter to steady them. And then, as if the universe wanted to confirm everything, I saw movement outside my window, Carol, walking up my driveway. I ducked out of sight just as she reached the porch. A moment later, the knocking began. Hard. Impatient. "Maggie," she called through the door, voice bright and false. "We need to talk, dear." Dear. She used that word like a knife. I didn't answer. She knocked again, louder this time. Then I heard the metallic rattle of the doorknob. She was trying to open it. I pressed my back against the wall, holding my breath, feeling every heavy thud of my heartbeat against my ribs. Thankfully I had locked it. She tried again. And again. Finally she sighed, annoyed. "You can't avoid this forever." I stayed completely still until I heard her heels clicking back down the steps and fading away. Only when her car engine finally roared to life did I let myself breathe. I knew then that things had escalated past speculation, past suspicion, past even malice. What I saw in Carol's attempts to enter my home wasn't concern. It was ownership. A sense of entitlement so bold it made my skin crawl. They believed they already had the right to my life. But fate works in strange ways. The very danger they brought into my home ended up giving me the evidence I needed. It began the next morning. I woke to a noise coming from the living room. A soft thud, followed by the faint scrape of something being moved. My chest tightened. I reached for the small wooden cane I kept beside my bed. Not that it would help much if someone was truly in my house, but it made me feel less powerless. I tiptoed down the hallway. The noise stopped. For a moment the entire house felt like it was holding its breath. Then I heard a whisper. A man's whisper. "Check the desk. That's where she keeps everything." Jake. My blood turned to ice. I stepped back, heart pounding in my throat, desperate to stay silent. From the shadow between the hall and the dining room, I could see the faintest sliver of movement, 2 figures. Jake and Carol were in my home, breaking in, rummaging through my things, making decisions about my life like I wasn't even there. I ducked behind the corner so quickly I nearly stumbled. I clutched the cane so tightly my knuckles ached. "What exactly are we looking for?" Carol whispered. "Anything. Bank info. Medical stuff. Something we can use." Use. The word echoed through my skull like a gunshot. "I told you," she hissed. "You should have pushed her harder last night." "She's not going to sign unless she thinks she has no choice," Jake muttered. "We need leverage." Leverage. My body went cold. They were planning something that went beyond manipulation or pressure. This was strategy. Calculation. They were orchestrating a future where I was powerless. Then Carol said something that made my stomach twist so violently, I had to press a hand against the wall to steady myself. "She's old, Jake. Her memory is slipping. Everyone knows that. It'll be easy to convince people she's confused." "I don't like doing it this way," he said quietly. "You want the house or not?" Silence. Then Jake whispered, defeated. "Yes." My vision blurred. My heart broke in a way I didn't know was possible. It wasn't the plot. It wasn't the schemes. It wasn't the invasion of my home. It was his yes. Carol sighed. Then stopped feeling guilty. She's lived her life. It's our turn now. I hadn't realized tears were streaming down my cheeks until I tasted them on my lips. I needed proof, but the camera was too far away. I needed them to say more. I needed them to confess, to incriminate themselves. But from my position, hidden in the shadow of the hallway, I had only one advantage. They didn't know I was there. With trembling fingers, I reached into my pocket and silently pressed record on my phone. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped it. I held the phone close to my chest, trying not to make a sound, trying not to breathe too loudly. We just need her signature, Jake whispered. Once we have power of attorney, everything gets easier. And what if she refuses? There was a long pause. We'll make her, he whispered. The phone nearly slipped through my fingers. My son, my child, was discussing coercing me, like I was a legal obstacle. Not a human being. Not a mother. Not even a person. Just paperwork. Leverage. A signature. I wanted to scream. I wanted to burst into the room and throw them out and demand to know when I stopped being someone they loved and became someone they needed to remove. But fear held me in place. Fear and strategy. If I confronted them now, I'd lose the only advantage I had. I'd lose the chance to gather enough proof to protect myself legally. I'd lose the opportunity to understand just how far they were willing to go. So I stayed. Silent. Watching. Recording. Carol continued, voice low and sharp. If she won't sign willingly, then we'll use what we found. What did we find? Jake asked. There was a rustle of paper. Bank statements. Insurance. Her medical records from last year. Enough to claim she's unfit. Unfit. I felt the world tilt sideways. I had always been healthy, slower, sure, but fully independent. They were twisting my entire life into something they could weaponize. Jake hesitated. We shouldn't rush this. We're not rushing anything, Carol said firmly. Your mother is stubborn. That's not our fault. But her refusal doesn't change reality. We need that property. And your sister. Sister. Jake cut in sharply. Leave her out of this. Sister. My blood went cold. I didn't have a daughter. But Jake did. His teenage daughter, Emily, my granddaughter. What did she have to do with this? Carol exhaled loudly. We need money, Jake. For tuition. For everything. And your mother is sitting on a fortune she doesn't even use. Fortune. That's how they saw my home. Not as the place where Jake learned to walk, laugh, love. Not as the place where my husband and I built a life. But as money. Disposable. Claimable. Transferable. Jake sighed, exhausted. Fine. Let's finish. My breath caught. Finish. Finish what? Before I could think, before I could move, there was a sudden creak. The slightest groan of old wood. I had shifted my weight. Just barely. Jake froze. What was that? He whispered. Carol stiffened. Did she wake up? Panic surged through me like fire. Jake stepped into the hallway, slow and deliberate, his silhouette stretching toward me like a shadow from a nightmare. I backed away silently, praying he wouldn't look around the corner. But he did. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. His face drained of color. Mom! His voice shook. Not with fear. With guilt. With realization. Carol appeared behind him, her eyes widening when she saw me. Oh my God. I straightened my spine and held up the phone, still recording. Get out of my house. They stared at my raised phone like it was a weapon. In a way it was. Carol stepped forward. Margaret, listen. Get out. Jake swallowed hard, his voice cracking. Mom, please. We can explain. You already did. Carol reached out, but I stepped back sharply. If either of you come near me, I'll scream so loudly the whole neighborhood will come running. Jake's shoulders fell. Carol's face twisted into something dark, something hateful she could no longer hide. But they left. Not because they respected me, because they were afraid of what I now held in my hands. Proof. Undeniable proof. And I knew as the door slammed behind them that everything had changed. Finally, I wasn't the one in danger anymore. They were. When they finally left my house, slamming the door behind them, the silence they left behind felt heavier than their presence. It pressed against my chest, thick and suffocating, like the air before a storm. I locked the door, checked it twice, then a third time and leaned my forehead against the cool wood. My hands were still trembling around the phone. My legs felt numb, and for a moment I thought they might give out. Jake's eyes, those eyes I had known since the moment he first opened them in my arms, still stared at me in my mind. Shock, guilt, and something else. Something darker. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I didn't scream. I felt nothing. Nothing except a strange icy stillness. It was the feeling you get when the final piece falls into place. When the truth is so clear, so undeniable, that denial simply dissolves. There was no maybe. No, but surely he wouldn't. No, they don't mean harm. They meant harm. Worse, they meant control. Power. Ownership. And they thought I was too old, too isolated, too emotionally attached to fight back. They didn't know me at all. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The phone lay in the center, still recording, until I finally pressed stop with a trembling thumb. The silence that followed the click echoed in the room. I saved the file, then copied it again. One copy went onto a USB drive I slipped beneath the loose floorboard. Another onto a second drive that I tucked into the lining of my purse. A third I sent to an email account Ethan had set up for me years ago when he taught me how to use basic online tools. I hadn't opened that email in ages, but at that moment it felt like a lifeline. Only then, when every copy was secure, did the shaking return. I wrapped my arms around myself, holding tightly, the way mothers hold frightened children. Because in that moment I realized something terrifying. I had been afraid of losing my home, but they had been planning to take my freedom. And if I hadn't overheard them, I closed my eyes, refusing to follow that thought to its conclusion. I stood up, steadying myself against the table, and went to the window. The driveway was empty. The street was quiet. Their car was gone. But I didn't feel safer. I felt watched. Not by eyes on the street. By memory. By betrayal. By the awareness that blood ties don't guarantee love. And sometimes they hide the deepest cuts. I knew what I had to do next. I called Ethan. He answered on the second ring. Maggie. The moment I heard his voice, something inside me cracked. Not with weakness, but with relief so intense it made my knees buckle. I held onto the counter to keep from collapsing. I need your help, I whispered. He didn't hesitate. I'm coming. You don't even know what I'm asking. And I don't care, he said firmly. Tell me where you are. I'll be there in 20 minutes. No, my voice came out sharper than I intended. Not here. Not now. Not yet. He paused. Are you in danger? I swallowed. Not at this exact moment. That's not comforting. I have proof, I said. They were here. Jake and Carol. There was a hard silence on the line. A silence I had never heard from him before. What did they do? He asked, his voice low. I recorded them. Maggie. They talked about taking everything. About power of attorney. About leverage. He exhaled sharply, almost a growl. I'm getting the helicopter. Text me your location. No, I repeated. They might be watching. Another pause. Then tell me what you need. I closed my eyes. Help me make this undeniable. He didn't ask how. He didn't question my plan. He simply said, tell me what to do. And that was the moment everything shifted. Because for the first time I wasn't alone. I had someone who believed me. Someone capable. Someone powerful. And someone who owed me nothing except the truth that he chose to stand by me anyway. I lowered my voice. I want to meet somewhere they won't expect. Public. Neutral. And safe. Name it. I thought for a moment. Then said. The old community hall. I'll be there. And Ethan? Yes. Come alone. His tone softened. Of course. When I hung up, I felt the shift inside me more clearly. I wasn't the frightened, cornered woman from yesterday. I wasn't the trusting mother of last year. Something new had taken root, something fierce. I changed clothes, packed a bag with the essentials, slipped the USB drive into my shoe, and grabbed my keys. The house felt small as I walked through it, like it was closing in around me. My husband's picture sat on the mantel. I touched the frame gently. I'm sorry, I whispered. I didn't see this coming. The truth was I felt guilty. Guilty for raising a son who could do this. Guilty for not noticing sooner. Guilty for letting it get this far. But guilt wasn't useful anymore. Survival was. I stepped outside. The air felt heavy. As I walked to my truck, I checked the street twice. No cars. No figures. Still, I moved fast. I drove to the community hall, an old stone building at the edge of town where people held meetings, weddings, and school plays. The parking lot was mostly empty. I parked under a tree, scanning the road behind me. No sign of Jake or Carol. When I stepped inside the hall, the scent of old wood and dust filled my nose. Familiar and oddly comforting. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, casting long pale beams across the floor. I stood in the center of the room, clutching the phone in my hand. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. And then I heard it, the distant thrum of helicopter blades. The sound grew louder, vibrating through the old rafters. Dust drifted down from the ceiling in soft clouds. And I felt it. The turning point. The moment when everything that hunted me would be forced to face what I had become. The helicopter landed behind the hall. Moments later, footsteps echoed down the corridor. The door opened. Ethan stepped inside. And the second he saw my face, his expression hardened with protectiveness I hadn't seen in anyone in years. "Maggie," he said softly, "tell me everything." And I did. For the next hour I told him every detail. Every whisper. Every threat. Every document. Every violation of my home, my safety, my dignity. He didn't interrupt. Not once. When I finished, his jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscle ticking. "We're going to end this," he said. Completely. I believed him. Because for the first time in months, the fear inside me had stopped growing. It had turned into something else. Resolve. And I was ready. Ready to fight for my home. Ready to fight for my life. Ready for whatever came next. I didn't sleep the night after meeting Ethan. My mind replayed everything. Jake's voice, Carol's threats, the invasion of my home, the recording. But underneath all of that, something stronger pulsed through me. Determination. A force I hadn't felt since I was young, since before my husband died, since before I learned to shrink myself to keep peace. This time I wasn't shrinking. Early the next morning, Ethan drove me back to my house. Not by helicopter, but in one of his cars, discreet and quiet. The sun had barely risen, and the dew on the grass sparkled like glass shards. I clutched the USB drive in my pocket as if it were a weapon. "Maggie," he said gently, "once we walk in there, your life changes. There's no going back." I nodded. "I don't want to go back." He looked at me the way someone looks at a fire they didn't expect to see. They're afraid to touch it, but mesmerized by its warmth. "All right," he said softly. "Let's go." My house felt different when we stepped inside. Lighter. As if the fear that once soaked into the walls had evaporated overnight. Or maybe I was the one who had changed. We sat at the kitchen table. I pulled out my phone and played the recording for him again, just to watch his reaction. When Jake said, "We'll make her sign," Ethan's jaw clenched. When Carol said, "She's old, easy to discredit," he leaned forward, fists tightening. And when they stepped into my hallway and Jake whispered, "Mom," with guilt dripping from his voice, Ethan closed his eyes. Not in pain. In fury. "You're not going to face this alone," he said. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the table. An unknown number. My stomach twisted. Ethan gestured. "Put it on speaker." I answered. "Hello." A familiar voice came through the line, thin, almost trembling, but not with fear. With rage. "Carol." "Margaret, you need to come to the house," she said. "Right now." I didn't speak. "I'm not playing anymore," she snapped. "This is serious. You should have thought about that before breaking into my home," I said calmly. There was a long silence. Then she chuckled, an ugly, humorless sound. "So you know." "I know everything." Another silence. When Carol spoke again, her voice was a razor blade wrapped in velvet. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly." "No," she hissed. "You don't. If you take this route, if you choose to fight us, you'll lose more than your house." Ethan shot me a warning look, but I didn't need it. I ended the call. He exhaled. "She's panicking." "No," I said. "She's preparing." We both knew what that meant. This wasn't over. Not even close. We spent the morning gathering everything: documents, photos, timestamps, the break line report, the recording. Ethan organized everything with the precision of a man who'd built an empire from scratch. When he finished, he placed his hands flat on the table. "This is enough," he said. "Legally, morally, this is everything." "What happens now?" I asked. He hesitated. "Now we give them the chance to tell the truth." I shook my head. "They already told me everything they needed to." "You deserve closure," he said gently. "You deserve to face them from a position of strength." I looked at him, at the man who once sat at my kitchen table as a hungry teenager with bruises he wouldn't explain. I had loved him like a son, and now he stood by me like the son I never truly had. "All right," I whispered. "Call them." Jake didn't answer. Carol did. When Ethan told her we wanted to talk, her voice sharpened. "Where?" "At the house," he said. "Her house?" she asked, disbelief dripping from every syllable. "No," Ethan said firmly. "Yours." I could almost hear her swallow. "Fine. Be here in an hour." When the call ended, Ethan turned to me. "You ready?" "No," I admitted. "But I'm going anyway." The drive to Jake and Carol's house felt surreal. I had driven that route dozens of times for birthdays, holidays, ordinary dinners. But today, every familiar landmark felt like a farewell. The fields, the old church, the bend in the road near the pond, all of it felt distant. When we pulled into their driveway, my heart thudded so hard I had to grip the seatbelt to steady myself. Carol stood on the porch, arms crossed, face tight. Jake stood behind her, pale and tense like a boy caught stealing. We walked up the steps together. Ethan's presence at my side felt like armor. Carol didn't wait for pleasantries. "Come inside," she snapped. But Ethan held out his hand, blocking her. "We'll talk out here." Her lip curled. "This is ridiculous." "This is happening," he replied. Jake stepped forward, eyes flicking nervously between us. "Mom, can we just talk?" He sounded like a child. I didn't soften. "Talk," I said quietly. "You mean like you did in my house the other night?" His face drained of color. "You heard." I held up my phone. "I recorded it." Carol's face twisted. "You had no right." "I had every right," I said. "You broke into my home." Jake swallowed. "Mom, we didn't mean." "Don't lie," Ethan snapped, stepping forward. "Not now." Carol glared at him. "This has nothing to do with you." "It has everything to do with me," he said, voice steady and lethal. "Because I care about her. Something neither of you seem capable of." She scoffed. "This is a family matter." "Then why," he said slowly, "were you planning to take her home? Her money? Her freedom?" Jake's voice cracked. "It wasn't like that." "Then explain it," I said softly. He looked at me. Really looked at me. For a moment I saw the son I raised. The boy who scraped his knee and cried in my arms. The teenager who hugged me when his father died. The man who promised he'd take care of me someday. But then Carol's eyes cut into him, sharp as a blade. And the boy vanished. "It was an opportunity," he whispered. I felt something inside me break. Not violently, not loudly. Quietly. Like a small bone snapping under too much pressure. "An opportunity," I repeated. "To ruin your own mother?" Carol stepped closer. "You're overreacting. This house is too much for you. You're getting older. You need help." "Breaking into my home is help?" I asked. "Sometimes," she said coldly. "People don't know what's best for them." Ethan let out a soft, dangerous laugh. "You're unbelievable." She shot him a glare. "Oh, you think you're better? You think because you have money." "This isn't about money," Ethan said, his voice soft but scorching. "It's about cruelty." Jake ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "Mom, please. You're blowing this out of proportion." I stepped forward. "Jake," I said, voice trembling but steady. "You tried to take my life. Not by killing me, but by erasing me. By taking my home, my autonomy, everything I built." He covered his face with his hands. I didn't know what else to do. "You could have asked," I whispered. He didn't respond. Carol scoffed. "This is pointless." "Actually," I said, lifting my chin, "this is the entire point." I held up the USB drive. "I'm taking this to a lawyer." I'm pressing charges. And you will never ever step foot in my home again. Carol opened her mouth, stunned. You wouldn't dare. I already have, I said. Her eyes widened. What? I pointed behind her. A police cruiser was pulling into the driveway. Jake whipped around. No, Mom, wait, please. But I didn't move. 2 officers stepped out. They nodded to me first. Miss Ellison? You called. Yes, I said. And I have everything you need. Carol's face twisted. This is insane, she's insane. Jake grabbed her arm. Stop. But she didn't. She lunged toward me. Ethan stepped in front of me instantly, blocking her with ease. Don't, he warned. For a moment Carol froze. Stunned. Humiliated. Enraged. Then one of the officers stepped forward. Ma'am, I need you to calm down. Her voice cracked. She's lying. Jake sagged, defeated, eyes full of something that looked like regret but came too late. The officers led them both aside. And I exhaled. A long trembling breath I felt in every bone. Ethan placed a hand gently on my back. It's over. I didn't answer right away. I watched the officers take statements. I watched Carol argue. I watched Jake stare at the ground, shoulders slumped. And finally I whispered, No. Ethan turned to me, concerned. No. I looked up at him. It's not over, I said. But it's the beginning of the end. And for the first time in months, I felt free. Alive. Whole. Because this wasn't just the climax of a fight. This was the moment I reclaimed my life. The days that followed should have felt like victory. I had proof. I had support. I had finally exposed everything Jake and Carol were doing. But victory doesn't always feel like triumph. Sometimes it feels like a long exhale after holding your breath for too many years. Relief mixed with exhaustion, mixed with grief so quiet it almost goes unnoticed. The officers didn't arrest Jake and Carol that day. They took statements, collected the evidence, and opened an investigation. It wasn't quick and it wasn't simple. These things never are. But for the first time, the truth wasn't just in my head or my heart. It was in writing, in audio, in the hands of people whose job was to protect the vulnerable. Vulnerable. I had never liked that word. It made me feel thin, see-through, like someone others could look at without really seeing. But as I sat alone in my living room after they left, the sun dipping behind the trees, I understood something I hadn't before. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is honesty. And sometimes honesty is the strongest thing a person can carry. I sat on the edge of my sofa, feeling the weight of everything. The silence in the house no longer felt threatening, but it wasn't comforting either. It felt transitional, like a room after guests leave, before you turn off the lights. A pause between chapters. That was when I heard a soft knock. I stiffened, but the knock wasn't forceful, just gentle, patient. When I opened the door, I found Ethan standing there, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. Thought you might not want to be alone tonight, he said. I stepped aside. Come in. He walked inside, looking around the room the way someone looks at a place that holds memories for them. And in a strange way, my house did hold memories for him. Late dinners, warm afternoons, the comfort of a kitchen that never judged him. You okay? He asked, turning toward me. I'm adjusting. He nodded. That's fair. We sat at the table, the same place where I first played him their recording. I made us tea not because either of us needed it, but because it was something familiar, something small and grounding. For a long moment we didn't speak. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It was shared. I should have realized sooner, I said finally, staring at the steam rising from my cup. I should have noticed the signs. No, he said. You shouldn't have had to. I didn't respond. The guilt was still there, thin, lingering, persistent, but not as sharp as before. I keep wondering, I murmured, where I went wrong with Jake. Maggie, Ethan said softly. You didn't do anything wrong. I shook my head. Mothers always think they could have changed something. He leaned forward. Sometimes people choose who they become. Not because of who raised them, but because of what they want. I looked at him, really looked at him. The successful billionaire. The man people admired. The man who had every reason to turn bitter because of the childhood he endured. And yet he chose to be kind. Maybe he was right. Some people choose. Others justify. Jake had chosen. Carol had chosen. And I was choosing to reclaim my life. After a while, Ethan cleared his throat. There's something else I want to talk to you about. I tensed. What? My company has a legal department. A good one. They're ready to take your case, quietly, thoroughly, and without charging you a dime. Ethan. No, he said firmly. You helped me when I had no one. Let me do this. My throat tightened. Gratitude mixed with a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Thank you, I whispered. He smiled gently. You deserve safety. You deserve peace. The word peace echoed in my mind long after he said it. Peace. What an unfamiliar idea. The legal process unfolded slowly but predictably. Investigators reviewed the recordings, the break line report, the footage of Jake in my hallway, the evidence of documents missing from my home. Carol grew more frantic as the weeks passed, sending messages I refused to answer. Jake stayed quiet. Whether out of shame or fear, I'll never know. The officers issued a restraining order. My locks were changed. Neighbors began checking in. The atmosphere of threat that once suffocated my home evaporated piece by piece, like morning fog lifting under sunlight. Still, there were moments when I stood by the window watching the empty road, wondering how my life had changed so much so quickly. It felt like waking from a nightmare only to realize part of it had been real. One afternoon, I received a letter from Jake. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. His handwriting, once so familiar, felt foreign. The message was short. Mom, I'm sorry. For everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that. Jake. I read it twice. Then folded it. Then put it away. Not because forgiveness was impossible, but because forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. And I wasn't ready for either. Maybe one day. Maybe never. Either way, the choice was mine. A month after everything began, I invited Ethan to my house again. This time not out of fear, but companionship. We sat on the porch, the warm breeze rustling the leaves, the sky streaked with pink and gold. I felt lighter. He glanced at me. You seem more at ease. I am. You deserve that. I looked out at the yard, my yard. The one my husband and I had built. The one I thought I'd lose. The one I fought for. I have my home, I said. And myself. Ethan smiled. That's everything. For a moment we simply sat in the quiet. Then he cleared his throat. So now that things have settled, what do you want to do next? I thought about it. For so long my life had revolved around fear, survival, betrayal. Now with the dust settling, there was room for something new. Something mine. I want to live, I said finally. Not just keep going. Actually live. He chuckled softly. I think you've earned that. I smiled. And for the first time in a long time it reached my eyes. That night I sat alone in my living room, the warm glow of the lamp softening the edges of the room. I held the USB drive in my hand, the small simple object that had saved me. Evidence. Truth. Strength. I walked to the fireplace and placed the drive into a small metal box with the other copies, sealing it shut. Not to hide it. Not to forget. But to honor the woman I had become. I stood there for a moment, letting the warmth wash over me. Then I whispered the words I had carried for weeks. It's over. But what I really meant was, it's beginning. My second life. The one where I wasn't someone's mother, or burden or target. Just me. Whole. Free. Unbreakable.